Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar. I'm Jed Morgan. In the battle of having neutral and good entertainment before anything else, the Daily Wire has decided to throw their hat into the ring and see if they can fill this void that Hollywood has created for themselves by being so politically divisive. And when it was first announced that Daily Wire was going to start making movies, I admit that I was first concerned because I didn't necessarily want to see an extreme in movie making in the opposite political direction. And from what I've seen so far, I've been happily surprised where they seem to be coming at it from a very neutral perspective. From their release of the trailer of Terror on the Prairie and the Hyperions, definitely don't seem to have very many political motivations in that one. And from what I heard about Shut In, there were some religious undertones in it, but it wasn't necessarily political undertones. I still haven't seen the film. I do plan on it at some point. I just missed the premiere on YouTube and don't have a subscription, so I'll get around to it at some point. But it is an interesting conversation to have because it seems to have done very well considering the type of studio that the Daily Wire has, how many people showed up to watch it. And we got this article here from Bound in the Comments. Shut-in's critical success is a shot across Hollywood's bow. And I don't know if we're quite at the point yet where we can say that it's Daily Wire's threatening Hollywood. We're far from it. But the fact that a film like this can compete at the level that it is may help 100 more like it to pop up and just create the independent sphere and blow it up in such a way that the independent sphere as a whole can outshine the mainstream Hollywood sphere. And that would be something very interesting and very important to see considering the current state of Hollywood. So I don't believe the Daily Wire will ever be able to compete 1v1 versus Hollywood, but it very may create the opportunity for a host of similar companies to compete all together. But let's take a look at what Bounding into Comics' take on this is. The Daily Wire has been quite busy over the last week, debuting their much-awaited thriller Shut-In to audiences via its website and YouTube, while also debuting trailers for two new films, The Hyperion and Terror on the Prairie. And I enjoyed both of those trailers. They both look fun and interesting. The Hyperion looks fucking insane. Terror on the Prairie is definitely a movie that I'd be more interested in of the two, but I do actually have a review of the Hyperion's trailer on geeksandgamers.com that I wrote for them, so you all should definitely check that out. The timing, while obvious, couldn't have been better, especially as we move further into 2022. Recently, Bounding into Comics predicted that 2022 would be the year when the culturally pendulum finally started swinging back in favor of the fans and away from the pretentiousness of egotistic Hollywood elitists. Films like Shut-In are helping to turn that theory into a full-fledged reality. Yes, I think it'll end up being like a drop in the bucket, but it'll help add to that bucket in the end. It'll inspire others. I don't see it having an effect in and of itself, and I don't think this will be the year for the cultural pendulum swing. I can see it starting, and I guess that maybe, started swinging back. I could see that potentially being the case, but I see it being about 5 more years before we see consistent swinging back into a more neutral direction. And that's all I want from Hollywood is default neutrality. It's okay to have a liberal movie. It's okay to have a conservative movie. It's okay to have a black-oriented film. It's okay to have a white-oriented film or an Asian-oriented film, as long as the default is neutral, as long as there's opportunity for all types of storytelling, as there very much isn't in Hollywood at this current time. So that's really what I endeavor to assist with in whatever small way I can here on YouTube, is getting people together to believe in that idea of default neutrality. We were one of the first outlets to review Shut-In for audiences and did so a few days in advance of the film's release. In our review, we said that the film had a few minor narrative flaws that were incompatible of derailing the larger narrative, not to mention the great atmosphere. In the end, we scored the film 8 out of 10 with strong praise directed toward the actor performances and directorial style. From what I heard, that may be a bit excessive, a bit over what it deserves, but again, it might be another case similar to the Disney Plus shows. A thirsty man in the desert will drink whatever he finds and be happy with it. I do think it sounds good, but 8 out of 10 seems a little too high a praise for a film of that quality. But I'll definitely have to watch it and review it for myself to make the final determination. It seems that mainstream comic critics largely agree with our take, with audiences' reviews are similarly stellar. Currently, Shut-In is enjoying a whopping 100% critic score and a 97% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which is quite astonishing in itself. Now, the audience review, I can believe that enough people rated that highly, especially considering the current state of Hollywood. And the 100% critic score is a tad misleading, considering that the majority of critics have this like ban or boycott of reviewing any Daily Wire film. So I think there's 5 critic reviews on Rotten Tomatoes right now, and they're all positive by people who don't care about that boycott, and or from people like Bound in the Comics who enjoy or are happy with this change that the Daily Wire is accomplishing. So I think if the normal critics actually took a jab at this film and posted their reviews, it would be closer to 50-40%. I can see them review bombing it heavily, but right now they're just boycotting it, and that can artificially inflate the current score as it is. Yeah, see, 5 reviews. And here's the reason why. Typically, conservative media projects tend to get attacked by critics, many of which are dubbed access media, a moniker meant to describe a tendency to give glowing media reviews simply for the sake of establishing cozy relationships with the studios in question. This habit has picked up steam in recent years, but it has been around for a while. Yeah, no, they're usually review bombed, but they're just not reviewing this at all, so that won't be the case. Video games journalists and news outlets have been suffering from the problem for the last 2 decades, if not more. There are multitude recorded instances of video game developers threatening to yank advertising dollars if certain publications didn't score their games highly. And I understand why they do stuff like that, but it just makes things harder for people to trust any of these publications. So if they're constantly showering praise on everyone, their reviews mean nothing. Very much similar to the classic syndrome quote from The Incredibles: if everyone's super, then no one is. So if every review is positive, none of them are. So this is a double-edged sword that they're starting to reap the rewards from by these studios, film or game studios, of this decision to create the access media. By creating the access media, they destroy the access media. And it'll take a long time for that destruction to come about, but we're already starting to see the beginnings of it with people on Rotten Tomatoes versus critics constantly disagreeing on nearly everything because you can't trust the critics anymore. No one can trust the critics, and that's just becoming more and more apparent as the years progress. Later on, the trend started to operate in reverse. News outlets would review video games, TV shows, or movies with the ridiculously favorable reviews, similarly to court favor with studios in hopes that they'd get access to red carpet events or insider scoops of future projects. The grift is real, and it's been going on for years. Very much so. And even when they're getting access and operating as access media, they deny it heavily, like the OneRing.net on their live stream where they were partnered with Amazon Studios to view the trailer during the Super Bowl the other day. They had access to Prime Video to do it early. And in the stream, they're like, we're not access media while having access to this. It's just incredibly hypocritical, and I doubt even they realize to the extent of this weird sphere of access that they're in. It's very strange to see the denial in them, or at least the opinion that all the fans are idiots to believe these lies. Our review of Shut-In was done with objectivity and honesty in mind, and would have been both dishonest and counterproductive to simply slap a perfect 10 or even a 9 on a film that we knew was deserving of an 8. Hence, we stand by our review, and it seems to run parallel with what most audiences think. And I still disagree with what I've heard about the 8 being too high, but this does stand as a point overall. We can trust Bound in the Comics at least regularly because they are not access media, because they don't do this. And we've got another ad putting on music. So yeah, this website is not a wholly positive website. And because of that, we can trust them to a certain extent when they are positive. And that's what sets them apart from similar sites and what makes them not access media. Granted, any sort of review is subjective, and not everyone will be interested in a film with the premise of Shut-In. However, that's a far cry from proposally dealing a low score in a movie because the reviewer in question doesn't agree with the politics of the studio or distribution company. That's true. a lot of people may not be interested in whatsoever. And so their reviews are still important, but at the end of the day, you're never going to satisfy everyone, and Bound in Comics seems to accept that. The largest and long-running gag on Rotten Tomatoes is the comparison between critics and audience review scores, absolutely, which tend to skew opposite one another in a vast swath of cases. It's rare for the two to even line up and agree on anything, but in this case, both sides have found common ground. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about they haven't truly found common ground because the critics' score is artificially inflated by this boycott of critics reviewing this film, and that'll just skew it. Of course, it's fair to point out that Shutton currently only has 5 critic reviews, so yeah, they're talking about that, as opposed to Liam Neeson's latest Blacklight, which currently has 68. Shutton is being ignored by outlets like Vulture, the Los Angeles Times, the Assorted Press, but that's largely to be expected. Is it better for a film like this to be ignored by them or review bombed by them? It's an interesting question because everything gets reviewed by then, and a lot of people look at Rotten Tomatoes score, and if the fans and critics are opposite, they tend to agree with the critics more. And when they're together, a lot of people may be confused by that in the current era of Rotten Tomatoes. So I don't honestly know which is better, them to stay away or for them to review it. It's an interesting quandary. The refusal of these outlets to review a film produced and released by the Daily Wire is a signal that Hollywood is terrified of giving any sort of attention to alternate choices. I don't know if terrified would be the right word, but it goes against their narrative to accept films like this as being a possibility. So I wouldn't say terror, but it very much goes against the narrative that they've concocted for themselves. Would it be prudent for them to score the film with a certified rotten rating? Is it because they're afraid of giving the Daily Wire any sort of indirect marketing? And indirect marketing isn't usually a wholly accurate idea. It's not usually the case that becomes true. All right, this seems to be going into an astonishing amount of detail. This is an exceptionally long article. Holy fucking hell, this is massive. So, yeah, I think it's just going to sum up all that compared to other similar films and conservative films over the last few years. But it is interesting to see how fans and critics respond to this film. I don't agree with them that it's a shot across Hollywood's bow. I think it could be the start of something, but they're never going to admit that they're afraid, and I don't see them being wholly afraid to begin with. But I'd be interested to see what y'all think about this. Do you think Hollywood's afraid or not? It's going to take us a few years to see any changes derived from a situation like this, but you never know. Well, that's all I have for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you on the next video. Anon. If you like what I do here and want to see good, compelling stories that Hollywood will no longer give you, check out my book series, Odyssey of a Phoenix, a mythological epic about philosophy, morality, and modern-day mental illness issues. Books 1, Down in Flames, and Book 2, Apocalypse Then, currently on sale. Book 3, Kill the Dark, coming soon.